I'm Ernie Conover. Welcome to my shop, but welcome to my good friend Emiliano Archaval's shop, who is a turner in Maui, Hawaii, and he specializes in calabash bowls in the Hawaiian style. And he will tell you a little bit about the history and just the neat characteristics of these treasured items that date far back in Hawaiian history.
Oh, thank you, Ernie. Thank you for inviting me to your shop. It's quite an honor. I have followed you throughout my entire turning career. I'm very passionate about the Hawaiian calabash. It's more than just a bowl here in Hawaii. It's part of culture. Some of these Hawaiian calabashes have been passed down through generations, 5, 6, 7, 8 generations. When Captain Cook discovered Hawaii in 1778, he wrote in his journal that the Hawaiian calabash was a beautiful object. It was amazingly made, and perhaps it had a better finish than the ones made back at home on the lathe. He took some back home in that trip, and after him, Captain Vancouver also. I did a demo for a club in England, and one of the gentlemen from there sent me pictures. They're still at the British National History Museum. A lot of history. We have three different types of calabashes. Two are side grain, and one is end grain. The low-sided, which could be this one right here, this is an umeke mana'ai. It's a type of a low-sided paleva. This is what you give a baby when the baby turns 1 year old, umeke mana'ai. There is a few at the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, and they have an exhibition right now because they keep moving the exhibitions. They have one right now that belonged to Queen Emma. Obviously, it was given to her when she was Princess Emma, when she turned 1 year old, and then she became Queen Emma. So the history of the calabash goes back hundreds of years. After the paleva, we have the little bigger one. It's a little taller. The paleva turns to have a continuous curve, and it doesn't flare out as much as the taller one, which is the puahala or the kuoho. The kuoho is my best seller, and it's usually, I try to make it out of a crotch. So you end up with 3 end grain areas. We use the whole crotch. We don't cut it in half. In Hawaii, everybody tells you, take the pith out. Well, we like to leave the pith here because if it cracks, we put a peva patch. You guys in the mainland call it Flying Dutchman, butterflies. It enhances a bowl. The Hawaiian bowls had a lot of repairs, including the peva patch, a poho patch, which is you will take the rotten part and put a square piece. It takes hours to do it. We have one now commercially available. I'm looking at the camera and I'm seeing the sapwood. If you go to the Bishop Museum, you're going to see that most, if not all, the calabashes have sapwood incorporated. It wasn't done on purpose. It's just that they use the whole log to its maximum potential, and you're always going to have the sapwood. So if you make one at home, try to incorporate the sapwood. So the last one is the end grain calabash, which is always taller than wider, and it's called the puahala calabash. We believe that the Hawaiian artists copy the breadfruit tree fruit, not the gourd on the puahala. These are designed after the gourds. Only the king and his entourage were allowed to use wooden utensils. Or the commoners were only allowed to use the gourd. So they had a very important caste system. The commoners couldn't even look at the king in the eye. They had to get down on the ground and not look at them. This was obviously before Captain Cook came, before the missionaries came. Let me see what else I can tell you. We believe that 100% of the calabashes had a lid, a cover. They've been lost in history. It is very common for me to get an order for a lidded calabash. Imagine this was something that the king used in his hut, in his palace, in his kitchen. So they were used to put food. They were not just an item to look at. So they needed a cover. The lids have been lost in history. We do have quite a few at the Bishop Museum, but a lot of them have been lost. And we have an idea what they are, how they look, because thanks God, the Bishop Estate has kept up that exhibition for the last 200 years.
How did they get the tremendous polish on these bowls? Because you've showed me the ones that you've inherited in your family that are from before Captain Cook, and they glow. I mean, you have to sand to about 220 grit and use some kind of a finish. You probably could use a nut oil, but on the one I did, I used Waterlox, but it's a lot of sanding.
Good question. The Hawaiians use a lot of different stones, coral, and the final sanding was done with the skin of the sharks. If you ever touch the shark, it's almost like a very fine, maybe 180 to 20 sandpaper. That's a whole different story. It was a rite of passage for a king to become king to catch a shark with his bare hands. So the Hawaiians will feed the shark a tremendous amount of food, pork, and whatever they had available. The shark will become sluggish. There jumps the king in the water and get the shark. So they also fished a lot, so they will catch sharks every now and then. It's not something that you want to catch, but when they needed it, they knew how to catch the sharks. The sharks were their amakua. Amakua in Hawaiians is your spirit. When a Hawaiian died, they believe that your spirit went into different amakuas, a shark, an owl, a Hawaiian gecko, I think even a stone. So that is a good question, how they finished it. They even had pumice stones, coral, and the oil that they use, it's an endemic tree. It's called the kukui nut tree. The kukui nut, it's a little nut that looks almost like a walnut, and it has a lot of oil content. They also use that as a lantern. They will drill a little hole, put a wick, and that will burn all night in their cave or their hut.
Huh. That's amazing. Of course, the Europeans and the colonies here in America used shark skin in finishing some of their furniture. So again, the ideas have legs.
Yes. Simply amazing. In Hawaii, the calabash is more than just a bowl. It's part of culture. It's ingrained here in the culture. When a CEO of a bank or a big ranch retires, they don't get a golden pen or a golden watch. They get a 20, 25-inch calabash for their retirement.
That is amazing. And of course, I've read that that the culture revered repaired ones, as you mentioned earlier, more than just a perfect one. And it's sort of like people, they get dinged by life and they become richer for it.
Yes, some of the calabashes had names. So they will get passed down through generations, and the families were like the keeper of, then they had a name for it, and they will pass it down. I know two families that have calabashes, and they don't even know how old it is. They just know that it was passed down for at least 6, 7 generations. So it is possible that they were made before Captain Cook discovered Hawaii. Now, how can you tell if you find a calabash at a flea market here? Let's say that. How do you know if it's made before Captain Cook? The Hawaiians did not finish the inside. The inside, it wasn't rough, but it wasn't polished. They saw no reason to finish the inside when it was going to be full of poi. Poi is one of the staples in Hawaii. It's ground taro. It's like a paste that you eat with your fingers. So the inside of the Hawaiian calabashes are unfinished. I'm just about ready to start making mine with an unfinished inside. That will cut my work in by 50%. But nowadays, people expect the inside to be finished too.
As we both know, that the time between the chisel work and the sanding work becomes disproportionate. At first, you sand a lot longer, and then your turning gets better, but you still sand a long time.
Yes.
It doesn't come down that much, you know.
I had a couple of tourists a few months ago, and I have balls all over my shop that they'll pick them up, and I said, okay, I want this one. The wife picked one ball, and she was holding it, and she goes, I want this one, and I go, but I gotta finish it. She goes, why? I was very tempted to sell it as it was.
That's really really funny. So tell me a little about the woods that they're made from. Of course, kawa and is most mainlanders know what koa is, but there's other words.
Yes. The main wood used by the Hawaiians, and I think I have some, I think maybe not. It's kou, K-O-U, Cordia subcordata. The problem is that in the mid 1800s, a bug started decimating the kou tree population. At the same time, the first furniture makers with lathes came in Hawaii. So all of a sudden, the Hawaiian artist couldn't find his favorite wood, and also the king saw what the furniture makers could make, and the king was commissioning the furniture makers instead of his artist. So kou is very, very soft. It's considered a hardwood, but it's very soft, very easy to do. If you ever work with kou, you're going to understand why the Hawaiians loved it. It makes you look really good. You can leave that surface inside and outside that you can start with 150, 180 sand grit. There is only maybe one or two pieces out of hundreds at the Bishop Museum that they are not kou. There is one koa and one koa'ia. Koa'ia, it's an even denser species than koa. It used to be considered the cousin of koa, but about 12 years ago, we sent some specimens, some parts to our university, and they told us that based on density alone, the koa'ia, it was a different species. And koa'ia means koa/ia, koa of the fish. The wood was so hard and so dense that the Hawaiians would come and tie a knot on the branch, come back a few years later, and they already had the shape of the hook into the branch. So they would cut the branch and carve a wooden hook out of the koa'ia. The other wood that they used was milo. I read in some of the history books where there were milo trees so big that they could carve canoes for 12 warriors. You cannot find a milo tree that big anymore. It's just not around. So we don't know what happened to them. Same thing that with the sandalwood. We used to have sandalwood here, and it was the very first trade that the king used as money. He was trading sandalwood for money with China. Now, generations of Hawaiians were slaves of the sandalwood trade. There's still one hole, I forgot the name, but the Hawaiians used to carve a hole in the mountain close to the sandalwood, the size of the Chinese cargo ship. So they will cut and stack that hole. Once the hole was full, they will take all the sandalwood down to the harbor. Now, the Hawaiians hate it so much that at the end of the trade, they will see a sandalwood seedling. They will yank it off the ground because they didn't want their kids to do that when they grew up. Also, right now we're trying to bring. There's quite a few that have gone extinct, and the genetics of sandalwood that we have. There are pictures and drawings of sandalwoods, super huge and straight. Those were all taken down, and all the was left behind were the gnarly ones that they didn't want to cut. So we lost the genetics of the straight, nice ones. All we have is the short ones, gnarly ones, the ones that they didn't kill or cut down.
Yeah, it's natural selection at work.
Yes.
In reverse, really.
The other woods that the Hawaiians use, there were two reasons why they use these woods. Kou, K-O-U, Milo, and Kamani is because when they put their fish or their pig or their poi or anything inside here, it didn't give the food any taste or it didn't pass any flavor to the food. So that was one of the reasons. Kamani, I will compare it to almost like a mahogany, very, very nice. And we have the true Kamani and false Kamani. The false Kamani, if you put a board side by side, the false and they look exactly the same. So that's why it's called false Kamani, but they're completely different species. The true one is very hard to get.
Well, any of mahoganies are, of course, acacias, so they're probably both acacia families. I always say that in heaven, all wood will look like curly maple and turn like mahogany because you can scrape mahogany and it'll still come out without tear marks or anything else.
Yeah. That's one other thing about a kou. You can get by with a few mistakes, but with koa is very unforgiving. As my friend Mike Mahoney says, koa has humbled many a turner. Koa does not like to be scraped. It has to be cut all the way. You can do at the end, maybe just a very light negative rake scraping, but that's about it. And only 15 seconds, don't go 20. And even with 10 V steels, just lightly go one time, sharpen another. If not, you'll end up with torn grain in the end grain for sure with koa.
Yeah. So once you start to tear with a scraper, you've gone from a shear cut to a negative rake cut, and it's hell to pay for it.
Yes.
And it's this has been extremely interesting visiting your shop. I so much appreciate you're telling us all about Calabash bowls.
Thank you very much, Ernie. Thank you for the opportunity. And if anybody has a question, they can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Email me, call me, or better yet, come to Hawaii for a vacation. Come and visit me here. I have a place for you here, Ernie. Come and visit anytime. We'll do a show from here.
It sounds like a plan. I'll bring my fishing rod.
There you go. Don't forget your shorts.
Thank you so much for sharing your shop with us.